Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host with another marvelous video. In an era when Sony owned 60% of the gaming market share in North America with its PlayStation, Sega's Dreamcast still had a decent amount of skin in the game. Anyone who was into video games around the late 90s knew back then what I'm about to say in today's video. The Dreamcast wasn't simply the most powerful console in the wake of the 21st century, it was also arguably the most cost-efficient one while still showcasing the finer quality graphics of the time. Now, remember that I'm about to put in front of you 24 old games as a modern-day PlayStation fanboy. So, while you might not be swept off your feet or shaken to your core, these 24 old-timers are still the lookers of their generation, achievements from days long gone. Before we jump in, do drop a like and tell us about your favorite games from before the 21st century in the comments section. Now, let's get started, marvelous gamers. Soulcalibur. You know how Namco has a rep for taking an arcade game and blowing that version out of the water by enhancing and porting it for home consoles? Yeah, Soulcalibur was one of those cases. Successor to Soul Edge from '95, Soulcalibur has you chasing after the Soul Edge, a mythical blade that's fallen into the conniving hands of the Nightmare. The big bad is soon overrun by the sword's bloodlust, and the players must play as a group of warriors brought together by their quest to stop the chaos and madness. It packed an increased variety of modes, many of which are now common in fighting games but were quite new at its time of release. I enjoyed its beautiful 3D environments the most. The lighting was on point too. Don't take my word for it, watch those character shadows. The use of motion captured moves for combat models and animations did a fabulous job of fleshing this title out. Shenmue. Shenmue was quite an influential title. I mean, this is a game that contributed greatly to shaping up mechanics prevalent even in today's 9th gen games. Open worlds weren't really a thing in games back then, and neither were quick time events, but Shenmue was an ambitious release that presented the community with both. Sadly, it didn't perform as well as expected commercially, but it packs a mean revenge story starring martial artist teen Ryo Hazuki as he sets out to find his late father's killer. The gameplay here will have you exploring Japan's Yokosuka City in the 80s. You roam around, getting into brawls and looking for clues while the game throws the occasional quick time event your way. I found it hard to believe I was playing a game that came out 24 years ago. What stood out most was the degree of realism it possessed. Shenmue is quite immersive and compelling. Well, all I'll say is that it was way ahead of its time and that the teeny flaws can't touch its excellent production. Sonic Adventure. When I was younger, Sonic Adventure felt like a gamer's dream come true, especially in the early days of the Dreamcast, as the first 3D Sonic game Adventure was a fresh out-of-the-box title. I suppose we had the heavier focus on storytelling and the RPG elements to thank for it. Anyway, as far as the plot goes, you take control of Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and 3 other characters, one at a time, as they embark on a journey to put an end to Doc Robotnik's evil plans and save the world from being thrown into chaos. What's more is that while it was definitely recognized as a significant release for the Dreamcast, this one was also pretty solid as a part of the series. As a platformer, it packs a whole lot of action. All playable characters come with their own quirks and abilities, which varies the gameplay fabulously. I do wish that it came with better sound work. That's just me being a perfectionist. It's one that demands attention and does an excellent job at holding it. Even high-end PCs at the time couldn't make a game look this good. This game showed me that by paying attention to the overall presentation, including the smaller details, the developers get a better shot at making their high-quality visuals more effective and compelling. Dead or Alive 2. Dead or Alive 2 was another arcade title that was later ported over to the Dreamcast. DOA 2's story kicks off with the DOA World Combat Championship sponsor's death. Gradually, the world begins to unravel, and the second tournament is announced by a shady exec who, through his sheer corruption, manages to lure an evil Tengu into the human realm. Adding to the list of impending disasters, the spirit declares human life worthless and starts messing with the world. The tournament, however, is still a strong part of the plot, and you must beat all other competitors before taking on the evil Tengu. Dead or Alive 2's combat mechanics can be compared to a game of rock, paper, scissors. You can perform blows, holds, and throws where blows beat throws, holds beat blows, and throws beat holds. Outside of these, it also features a neat stun system. Overall, an unforgiving fighter experience with its 14 playable fighters, the Dreamcast version came with the added versus, sparring, and team battle modes. For the uninitiated, DOA 2 was already widely regarded as one of the best fighting games of all time, but the Dreamcast and PS2 version significantly upgraded the graphics and animations, and as a result, the overall quality of play. The character designs are definitely gonna feel satisfying to play with. I like this one just as much as I did Soulcalibur. Quake III Arena. This next title brings with it some stunning gothic architecture and technological environments. Quake III entirely abandoned the idea of a solo campaign and gave all its attention to the multiplayer experience. If you're thinking that it looks like Doom, you've got a sharp eye. The Quake games were made by the same guys after all. Not only that, but this one also maintains continuity with the previous Quake games and Doom. Yep, there's a big whopping gun in this one, along with certain other Doom weapons too. Your arena-based matches are fast-paced. Behind almost every door is a new wave of enemies for you to slaughter. There's something so gratifying about hearing the robotic voice go, "You have taken the lead." The Dreamcast port even allows you to form teams of 4 and engage in cross-platform play with PC players. The frame rate holds steady and makes playing in this engrossing, polished world quite addictive. I understood within 5 minutes of play why this one won GameSpot's annual Best Multiplayer Title Award. Cyber Troopers Virtual On Oratorio Tangram. Originally created for the Sega Model 3 arcade systems, Cyber Troopers Virtual On Oratorio Tangram was also ported over to the Dreamcast around late 1999 to early 2000. It plays like a sequel to Virtual On Cyber Troopers and is set 20 years after Operation Moongate. Ziggurat is long gone and the humans have since kept battling each other through VR in a quest for power. However, things take a dark turn when an evil AI becomes self-conscious and starts plotting to eradicate all of humanity. Your VR is the only one that hasn't been corrupted, and it's up to you to save the world. If you consider the fact that this is a game that relies heavily on the concept of VR, you'll begin to truly understand why it's as immersive as it is. The controls aren't the most user-friendly, but if you're patient with this game, you'll find yourself hooked. It would have been better received had twin sticks been compatible with the Dreamcast in the US back then, but sadly they weren't, and as such, the arcade players weren't as pleased as they could have been. Nonetheless, it still looks excellent in all of its high-definition visuals and attractive world. Echo the Dolphin, Defender of the Future. The 5th entry in the Echo the Dolphin franchise was also the last. Think of this one as a reboot rather than a sequel. It takes to a style of play similar to that of the previous games, but this time, the world's presented to you in 3D. I say reboot because the storyline's a bit different this time. When an alien race first threatened mankind, the dolphins and humans formed an alliance and fought for the planet. This time around, however, the evil alien foe have attacked the Earth's defenses, and Echo must restore them before freeing the planet from said aliens. You still have the sonar to communicate with other marine mammals, and moving around is mostly similar to the preceding games but tweaked slightly in favour of the glorious 3D environments. It felt like an ocean simulator when I played it. The geometry, its visuals, the water's texturing, the lush scenery, and the aquatic life all played their respective parts in forming this cutting-edge title. Tech Romancer. Borrowing a lot of its themes from mecha or robot anime genres, Tech Romancer is set in a faraway future where the Earth has bore witness to some crazy technological developments. All is good, and the Japanese folk are thriving when Goldibus, an evil alien ruler, attacks the planet to take it for himself. This is when a team of unconventional heroes comes together to ward off the tyrant using their mecha butts. The story mode and hero challenge mode are where you'd spend most of your time. The story mode entails playing each mecha's anime series-like story, and the dialogic decisions you make here might alter your endings. Hero Challenge, on the other hand, delivers a more arcade experience through its series of non-stop battles. You could also turn to the Hero Challenge mode and the Dreamcast VMU minigames when you need those points to unlock secret characters. I liked how I could destroy terrain in its flat 3D plane whenever I needed a helpful power-up. Honestly, Capcom surprised a lot of people with this one. The way they handled the anime character designs, paired them with decent graphics and delivered a simplistic but solid combat experience was impressive, even for a gaming giant like Capcom. The whole thing screams anime and has definitely got its own style. Metropolis Street Racer. Today's first racing game on the Dreamcast is Metropolis Street Racer by Bizarre Creations and Sega. This Dreamcast exclusive was actually the first in Bizarre's Project Gotham Racing series and fairly influential in the racing genre. Not only was it an early open-world racer, but it also introduced a reward system for lap times, driving style, and efficiency. Single player was the main appeal here, and as a street racer, you completed challenges to gain a reputation among other drivers. Players had plenty of time to build said reps because this was a game that featured 262 tracks, most of which had to be unlocked by playing solo. I found MSR to be the kind of game that not only looked great, but also came with some genuinely decent ideas. Take the kudos system and how it rewarded drivers for their style. Again, this isn't new for a racing game today, but back then, it was a pretty big deal, man. Everything ran smoothly, and it was largely acknowledged for its accurately detailed depictions of Tokyo, San Francisco, and London. Last but not least, I found the day-night cycle to be a nice touch because it actually factored in the time differences between its three cities. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 – New Age of Heroes. Marvel vs. Capcom was a series that never failed to get the fans riled up, and rightfully so. Both the MCU as well as Capcom have had rich character libraries for as long as I can remember. This crossover takes the form of a fighting game wherein you make your team of heroes, choosing from a roster of 56 characters to fight the other team, with each character going at it one-on-one. This one is the fourth game of its series and takes to a similar tag team style combat like Clash of Superheroes, but this time around you form teams of 3, use simpler controls, and have a character assist system to add a tactical edge to the play. This was the first one of its series to use 2.5D, with 2D sprite work and animation in combination with 3D rendered visuals and backdrops. Boy, was it marvelous to look at. The improved variable system did a lot to enrich the experience on the tag team front. A good many believed this to be the best 2D fighting title of its time. Its 2.5D graphical presentation is what took everyone by surprise, followed only by the level of insanity in its play.
Jet Set Radio!
Jet Grind Radio. Our next entry puts you in control of a young delinquent gang member. This is one of my personal favorites on today's list because of its wacky and video game appropriate concept. You're a part of this gang called the GGs who zip around Tokyo on inline skates, engaging in some funky vandalism, cop evasion, and gang battles. The gameplay presented players with street, trial, or rival showdown levels. Street entailed graffiti tagging, taking over rival territory and escaping the heat. Every now and then, a street level would present players with these boss fight levels where they came face to face with other rival gang members and were tasked with tagging them. Rival showdowns entailed matching rival movement techniques and tagging points before your rival in the race section. Trials, lastly, were the challenges you unlocked in an area after clearing its street and rival showdown levels. Jet Grind, or Jet Set Radio as you might know it outside the US, was the first title that adopted a cel-shaded art style. A good many developers adopted this style for their games later on, but nobody was able to tweak it to present the dreamy cartoon world along with smooth frame rates and animation. The House of the Dead 2. The House of the Dead 2 is a sequel that continues the events featured in the game before it. A year has passed since the disappearance of Agent G after the Curian Mansion incident. Venice has since fallen victim to a massive zombie outbreak. The AMS sends some of its best agents to investigate the cause and evacuate any survivors while also looking for G. Sadly, the agents realize that the situation at hand is quite similar to the Curian case. As you control Agent James Taylor, a second player can take control of Agent Gary Stewart. This is a rail game shoot-'em-up that takes players for a ride through the zombie-infected streets of Venice and makes them use their light guns to take down zombies and imps. The game does all the traversing for you, much like a roller coaster, but in Venice, with zombies coming after you whenever the ride takes a halt. The voice acting might give you the ick, but keep in mind that this was a 1998 arcade release that was ported over to the Dreamcast a year later. I appreciated how I was able to distinguish between them, even through its fast-paced, smooth gameplay. Even your environments are impressively detailed and hold true to the game's themes. Venice is dreadfully alive with the undead, and the portrayed environments give the whole thing a far superior gothic look. Shenmue II. A sequel to the heavily influential and significant Shenmue, this 2001 title picks up the story of teen martial artist Ryo Hazuki, where the first game left off. Ryo reaches Hong Kong, where he seeks Master Li Xiaotao, who happens to be his only lead in tracking down his father's killer, Lan Di. They start working on this one alongside the first game, as is apparent from their shared influential elements. The open-world environments, quick-time events, day-night cycles, weather effects, and brawls all live on in this sequel. They messed up a little in trying to port it over to the Xbox, and the Dreamcast was definitely the best platform to play it on. The Dreamcast also built further on all aspects of the first game that received praise. They expanded on the scale and combat specifically to make this a livelier game. Much like the first game, Shenmue II was every bit as bold and daring when it came to experimenting with gameplay and graphics. With all its refinement, players had at hand a game that put the Dreamcast to work, pushing it to its full potential while feeling like a swan song for the console. Rez is perhaps the most unique game we have for you today. I believe this one was greatly inspired by European disco music, thanks to the ideas of Tetsuya Mizuguchi. First seen on the Dreamcast and the PS2, Rez is a rail shooter that tells the story of a time in the future when the overwhelming flow of information in cyberspace has created the need for an AI that helps humans manage their data. One morning, when said AI, Eden, has a case of the Monday blues, it begins to question why it does what it does. Riddled with dilemmas and humanity's own conflicted nature, Eden goes to sleep. With Eden asleep, all that data is vulnerable to corruption. This is when a hacker is called upon to enter cyberspace and wake the dormant AI. Playing as this hacker, you embark on a musical shoot-'em-up journey in the mind of a malfunctioning AI. You must destroy data nodes while also shooting viruses and corrupt firewalls. Each time you destroy a node, your enemies change along with the level's music and layout. Seems pretty trippy, right? Well, it's also a visual treat. All the environments featured feel extremely psychedelic. The vivid sights you're made to witness will put you in a trance. It almost feels like Rez doesn't belong on a console. It's quite abstract, but that was a sight welcomed by sore eyes, especially by gamers who were bored of the usual shoot-'em-up titles back then. It's a shame that the Dreamcast version never made it to the US. F355 Challenge, Pasion Rosa. Moving on to a racing sim, Sega made this one for the Naomi multiboard arcade systems but later ported it over to the Dreamcast. As the name might have given away, the only car this title featured was the Ferrari F355 Challenge. To us modern-day gamers, this might be surprising, but it worked back then because this title was credited with being the most accurate F355 sim of its time. While the arcade original came with 6 different circuits to race in, console versions allowed players to race in 5 additional unlockable circuits. The rival AI was quite sharp for its time, and this one was largely acknowledged for its realistic physics. Sadly, there wasn't an online multiplayer mode, even though 2 players could play. But Pasion Rosa made up for it with handy assistance programs that worked in favor of the rookie drivers. Those F355s looked as polished as they could, and you could tear through these classy tracks at a smooth 60 frames per second. I also thought the environments with the different weather effects looked quite scenic and always made me feel that need for speed. Rayman II, The Great Escape. Set in the Glade of Dreams, a fantastical fairyland, the titular hero Rayman answers the call of duty when an army of robotic pirates invades the fairy glade. Leading these robotic rogues is the evil Admiral Razorbeard, who's laid waste to over 100 planets with the goal of ruling over them. Things seem to be manageable at first, but when the primordial core shatters into 1,000 pieces of yellow lumps, Rayman loses his powers and is captured. This is where your quest as Rayman begins. You must break free, save the land and rescue your captured friend, Blowbucks. This third-person 3D platformer will have you gathering lums and fighting robo-pirates. The levels are quite linear and tend to throw puzzles your way, but gathering lums lets you access new parts of the map. I found this one consistently and steadily giving me new abilities which kept the gameplay interesting and rewarding. The colours it puts before you will always feel vivid and refreshing. It's got a Tim Burton-esque design to pair with steady frame rates and breathtaking animation work. Each level is unique, with rich textures that are sure to delight you. Crazy Taxi 2. True to its name, Crazy Taxi 2 is nothing short of crazy, just like the first Crazy game, Crazy Taxi. This one was originally developed for and released on the Dreamcast before being ported over to the PSP as a compilation of the first 2 games in the series. It's pretty self-explanatory. You go around in a taxi picking up passengers and taking them wherever they want to go. In a departure from its prequel, this one lets you drive around with multiple passengers and even hop over surfaces to save time and get those tips. Your only restriction is the timer, at the end of which a passenger passengers jump out of the cab, irrespective of whether or not you've reached the destination. Yep, since time is the only restriction, you're free to drive as you please in your hopping, dashing taxi. If you like the first one, you're gonna love this one, as it retains those qualities while adding more to the chaos. The graphics are a bit refined, and it runs better than the first one did, seamlessly smooth and perfectly optimized for the Dreamcast. Lastly, it's commendable how they managed to take a fairly big map and load it with so many hidden shortcuts and passageways, while still making it all look neat and smooth. Project Justice – Rival Schools 2. Project Justice plays as a sequel to Rival Schools united by fate, and essentially adopts the same combat mechanics with certain changes that make their presence felt. This is one of Capcom's comprehensive fighting games, and while the prequel allowed you to fight in teams of 2, this one lets you bring another hero into the battle. Because this 3D fighter added another character to your team, players got to use 2 team-up attacks. Additionally, there was also a 3-character attack, the Party Up, the outcomes of which depended on your chosen characters. The Vigor meter was also altered to fit the trio format, and there were 5 new characters added after they removed Rosa and Sakura. Speaking of characters, the designs here had been touched up to keep up with the times, and they already looked excellent in the first game. I felt that this one had smoother animations too. Its release was delayed time and again, but the gameplay alone made it worth it. What made it special for me were the unique character designs. I mean, can you think of another game from the time that had already designed characters even remotely close to the ones here? Exactly. Sturmwind. Long after Sega discontinued the Dreamcast in 2001 came Sturmwind, an indie Dreamcast revival game created by Duranic. Production for this one started in 1997, but it was finally released in 2013. We first got a taste of this one on the Atari Jaguar as a CD demo, with only 1 level and no sound. Even then, it managed to get the community talking about how good it looked for Jaguar standards. This shoot-'em-up puts you in a space fighter ship and throws hordes of enemies your way. Your job is to put those baddies to rest while also avoiding any obstacles or projectiles headed your way. There are 16 levels in the normal mode that lets you pick up where you left off, and 6 arcade stages that don't allow continues. It scrolled both vertically as well as horizontally and resembled Axelay's weapon system in the sense that you had 3 different kinds of weapons to collect. This same weapon system was among the many things that it received praise for, along with accessibility, boss battles, and the score. It definitely outshone most releases on the Dreamcast, and I'd say this was because of its excellent pseudo 3D visuals. These were pre-rendered and paired with some special effects that brought the experience to life. All of it was so well presented, be it the environment designs, enemy variety, or even both the characters as well as the background animations. AOW Wings 2 Airstrike. Interesting as it is, while the first game was an aerial acrobatics simulator, Airstrike was an aerial combat training simulator. Notice how I said combat training sim? Yeah, this one doesn't have you flying over battlefields with the goal of dropping some heat. Instead, it was designed solely to train you to become a combat pilot. It came with 30 fighter pilot missions to get the hang of things and 15 tactical challenges that feature realistic combat scenarios and live targets. Surprisingly, one way or another, you're bound to find yourself spending most of your time in its free flight mode. But it makes sense if you think about it a little. It's obvious that a mode that gives you complete freedom is going to assist you in figuring out how your craft flies. Hell, it even lets you choose between standard and pro controls. It's crazy how real the physics and AI feel here. It goes a long way in making this an immersive experience. All your aircraft are so gloriously detailed that you could spend a good amount of time just admiring them. Aircraft damage, visual effects, and intricate moving parts add up to give it that tactical, militaristic feel, whereas the refined environments around you and the lighting, along with the tweaked camera angles, make the flight more compelling. Hydro Thunder. Moving on from the skies into narrow waters, our next marvelous entry packs a whole lot of thrill and energy into it. Hydro Thunder was an arcade release that was not only ported to the Dreamcast as a launch title, but also managed to make it as a Sega All-Stars title. It belongs to Midway Games' Thunder series of races and exhibits gameplay not unlike Sega's Daytona USA. With 4 classes of powerboats to race, each with its own stats and speed handling balance, you zip through inland water bodies collecting boost fuel. Boosting also lets you perform some cool maneuvers like knocking rival boats into the air, jumping to gain access to shortcuts, and more. This was a game that revived a genre of gaming that not many were interested in. Boat racing is tricky to portray through a video game because the controls require a lot of fine-tuning while still keeping the game exciting. But this one managed to do it with a whole lot of style. The graphics are epic. The Dreamcast version has far more detailed visuals than any other port, and while the water could have looked better, the environments make up for it with their vividness. The King of Fighters Dream Match, 1999. SNK released KOF 98, the Slugfest, in 1998 for the Neo Geo arcade, and followed it with a PlayStation release in Japan. Then came the updated Dream Match 1999 version for the Dreamcast. This one had its backgrounds remade in 3D. This was a game that SNK pushed as a special installment in the series since it had one of the most expansive character rosters in comparison to all the games before it. As far as the gameplay goes, it retains the features of KOF 97, and you still have to pick between the advanced and extra fight modes. upgrades. Though in all fairness, these come with their own minor modifications. Not only did the Dreamcast version come with redesigned 3D backdrops, but it also ran at a seamless 60 frames per second and had a kick-ass anime-style intro. A major part of the appeal was that classic Neo Geo fighter feel that came with it. It's a solid high-quality fighter with praiseworthy characters and quality mechanics. It made sense that this was the game that got more people into the series. Space Channel 5. Up next, we have Space Channel 5, another musical title brought to the Dreamcast by Sega. Just like Res, this one was also concocted by Tetsuya Mizuguchi after the folks at Sega asked him to come up with something aimed at female audiences. This time, the rhythm-based combat comes along with the story of Ulala, a reporter in space who's looking into the ongoings of an alien invasion. The gameplay entails copying the actions of your enemies in sync with the musical beat. They designed this one while heavily drawing inspiration from 1950s and 1960s culture and some of Michael Jackson and Peter Gabriel's later works. Impressively, this was a title that managed to appeal to both casual as well as dedicated gamers. It was often called a Dreamcast must-have for its uniqueness and presented players with a top-notch soundtrack and moving artwork. It was this very unconventional art style that made it such an endearing experience. Anyone who played it applauded how beautifully Space Channel 5 told its story within its whimsical world. Guilty Gear X. Our final game for today's list is yet another fighter and the second game in the Guilty Gear series. This one first hit the market as an arcade game before being ported to the Dreamcast in Japan. This 2D sci-fi fantasy fighter is a sequel to the first game of its series, Guilty Gear, and picks up on the story where its predecessor left off. The plot this time is centered around a new Commander Gear's emergence and another Holy Knights tournament. As far as the gameplay goes, this one features 16 playable characters and retains a hefty chunk of the prequel style of play. The few changes include the removal of the respect and taunt buttons, a revamped chaos gauge and instant kill, the inclusion of a guard gauge, and more. It comes with a more intricate graphic design that pays keen attention to detail, and all the characters are given reworked sprites. Let's not forget that these designs were already quite original and unique. The whole thing had an anime-style look to it, which I was quite fascinated by at the time of its release. The high-resolution quality has been paid enough attention to a point where this beautifully vivid game looks like a hand-drawn anime. Marvelous verdict. That's all we have for you today, folks. It was always obvious that titles like Shenmue, Soulcalibur, and Sonic Adventure were some of the best-looking games of the time available on the Dreamcast. Quite a few of the other games I mentioned have since been forgotten. I hope I was able to help you guys understand what it was that made these 24 games so special and was able to get you excited to give them a go. I also hope that at least a few of you inspired retro gamers have found your next Dreamcast title to try and get your hands on in this video. We do what we do only because your love and support keep us going. Thanks for watching, gamers, and stay tuned and stay marvelous.